So, okay, everyone. So continuing on today, and I'm looking forward to it. Before we do, who would like to start with the Lord's Prayer and activate the place?
I'll do it.
Awesome.
The Lord from whom the breath of life comes, who fills all realms of sound, light, and vibration. May your light be experienced in my innermost being. Your heavenly domain approaches. Let your will come true in all that vibrates in the universe, just as on earth that is material and dense. Give us wisdom, understanding, assistance, and discernment for our daily need. And help us detach the fetters of fault that bind us and karma that keeps us locked in this 3D, as we let go of the guilt of others. Let us not be lost in superficial things like materialism and common temptations, but let us be free from those things that keep us from our purpose on this world. From you comes the all-working will, the lively strength to act, the song that beautifies all and renews itself from age to age. Sealed in trust, faith, and truth, confirmed with my entire being. Amen.
Great, thanks, Sam. Okay, I mean, I've been getting heavily lately into oracles and actually studying deeper the art of getting intuition, the art of the I Ching, and learning it more deeply. So rather than do a rune stone or tarot, I did an I Ching for the group today for the work because it's so accurate. And when you hear it, you'll be like, wow, its accuracy is remarkable. The I Ching is quite a complex oracle system. So it takes a bit of learning and training to really master it. So I'll give a very layman explanation of it. So this was there's 64 possible hexagrams you can get. There's a lower hexagram, the bottom three, which are all basically what's called an earth receptive. So that's a pure yin hexagram. So it's a very yin hexagram because any broken line is a yin, any full line is a yang. So there's 5 feminine lines, 1 masculine. The bottom hexagram is what's called a pure yin, the earth receptive. And then the top one is what's called the thunder arousing. So basically, it's like arousing, like getting the earth out of a place of stillness. So it's like waking up. It's a form of enthusiasm or waking you up or arousing you from a slumber or self-deception or delusion, which I think couldn't be more appropriate for what's happening right now with the world and how easy it is to get into the mindset that everything's just okay, which is the biggest trick that the enemy likes. So a remarkably on the mark hexagram, if I might say so myself. Grace loves being aroused. Yeah, I think many do, Grace. Meaning. So there's many different interpretations of that 16. So what I did was we got what's called an unchanging line. Now what this means, it means it's a very clear reading. When you get what's called there's a changing reading, you get 2 hexagrams, which means there's multiple probable futures, various levels of complexity to the interpretation. Like as an example, about 2 months ago, I did an I Ching reading on the contract tracing that was happening across Australia. And it was just the craziest reading. It had 4 changing lines, which means pretty much meant there were many possibilities going to come out of it. And I think we've all seen that in the last 2 months. This one, by contrast, is a very black and white, very clear reading. So it means that this is the reading for the group today. So Brennan, a time for enthusiasm. Organise helpers, set your projects in motion. I think Sam Buckley will be shaking her head going, wow, with this. A great time. Sorry?
I said, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, so it's a time. And when you see the next 2 interpretations, Sam, you'll be shaking your head even more. A great time to play music plus honour and make sacrifices to God. There is an underlying spiritual element to acknowledge in all you do. It's the time to instill helpers, get the army to work. That's actually what it says. So there you go. So for Sam and Grace and Lexi and what we've been talking about, you can see it there. Cafe de Sol, the thunder over earth brings new energy to a situation. Sharing stories over fire in ancient times help clear stagnation. Use art, music, or any inspirational work to reignite your imagination, lift you out of this world. Release your joy, dance, let it rip, run wild. So there you go. Like a child on a wild and powerful elephant, when restrained, greatly powerful. Also a warning to take off rose-colored glasses if you've already been told what to do. Don't confuse enthusiasm with law of attraction. Preconceived conceptions can stop you seeing what really is. So I think it's a pretty good one. A pretty amazing accuracy for all that's going on in this time right now. So a real time to not confuse enthusiasm with law of attraction. In other words, to just kind of, it's actually a time of action is what it's actually saying, but also it's talking about joy, breaking up your stagnation, doing it by action, organizing projects, doing creative stuff, doing music, playing the piano. If you like art, do art. If you feel like dancing and stripping off and doing a pole dance at your house and stripping down your jocks and run around with joy around your street, do it. My cousin Grace will remember that when Grace so resonates G-strings mask, yeah, like Alex Mezix had a friend who got a G-string and put it on as a mask, and I pissed myself laughing. Deliberately, when I do wear a mask, which is only occasionally, just to certain shops out of respect for them, I dress myself up like a highway bandit and always get a bit of a chuckle. So it's kind of having creativity and having fun. So I've chosen, like I said, to basically, when I go out and about, I just don't bother. When I go into certain shops where I know the shopkeepers well, I choose to do it out of respect for them, not to make their job difficult, but I'll wear the most absurd mask. I've got a special cowboy hat and I make people piss themselves laughing, do it for fun. So this is a really good one here about releasing your joy, your dance, letting it rip, run wild. So balance the need for war and action with a time of joy and fun to keep your heart alive, keep it free, keep yourself celebrating, to keep your energy good. One thing in the art of war, which is written by Sun Tzu, brilliant ancient text, he says, a calm soldier you should never attack. A soldier who's frenetic, running around furiously, wait for them to wear themselves out, then go for them. And I can see in times past where I failed in spiritual warfare and warfare, I would do that. I'd run around thinking that confusing action for, effectiveness. Run around, I'd organize action groups, I'd do this, I'd do that, I'd aim for record time. I would be running around, taking on courts, going to court, taking on different governments, and I actually just wore myself out. And they waited. When I was exhausted, I got attacked, health things were put out of commission for ages. So the lesson is that this time around, for example, we are organising heaps of stuff in the background, but we're being precise, we're being calm, we're being measured, we're taking our time. If anything, I notice right now, the authorities are panicking. They're moving super fast because they know that more are awakening than they expected. So in a way, they're going to wear themselves out and overreact. So it's a great time to remain calm and have lots of fun and know that there's things are in hand while taking the action and not in any way being apathetic. And James de Corn, who's considered one of the best interpreters of the I Ching, great benefits to build up the country or business, get the army organised and working. It's a time to delegate authority and organise forces. So again, Sam and Grace and Lexia and Christine, I know especially the all we've been talking about intercession and others, it's just so mind-blowingly spot on, where we've been talking about organising a very lengthy intercession group and spiritual warfare group to really implement Ephesians 6 and actually get something that's sustainable and continuous. As Raymond Grace says, who'll be speaking this Wednesday at 7 o'clock Perth time at the Awakening Rim, he says what he's finding these days is a spiritual activity so intense that if you go one day without doing clearing, it goes backwards and you've got to work on it again. So we're finding that, like William and I, we find that we do it. We find by the time we come back to it 24 hours and work on our state government leaders already, usually a little bit more crept in. We've made tremendous progress in 6 days, but we're realising, I said to William, if we just keep doing it, we'll wear ourselves out. We'll have to take a break, and Satan never takes a break. So this is where we've got to organise, we've got to delegate, and make sure we're balancing it with fun. So this is an amazingly good one. So a king composes music and makes offerings to God with joy, inviting their ancestors to be present. So in the book of Chronicles, King David, the great king, was basically at one stage when he was celebrating to God, he had so much joy, he literally stripped down to his jocks and started running around dancing. Grace, remember when my cousin, Neil, on his wedding day, she and I were staying over his house because I was his best man, and Neil was so nervous about it, he just stripped right down, basically completely nude, and started running around the house screaming. And of course, Grace is like, "What the heck?" And he was just dancing around the house. It was way of letting go. I'm just losing it because he and I would always do crazy stuff like that. And Grace goes, "Neil, I can see it." And he goes, he said, your family, it doesn't matter. And we were just laughing and laughing like anything. And I always think of that and some of the funny things we would do. So I'm not recommending, Steve Plummer still reckons he's traumatized by my video 4 months ago. So I'm not necessarily saying you're going to see me dancing naked doing a pole dancing next week at the City Awakening. But even though I know some would be sad to miss out on that joy. Anyway, the moral of the story is it's really important to balance joy, fun, let your creative get out. If you feel like learning to play the piano, learn it. Online singing course. Do some art, do some drawing like some people are doing. Or write a poem, write a book. Grace says to me, "You look great on the pole." And Sam, Satan has a huge army. Oh, yeah, no, Satan absolutely doesn't stop working, Sam. That's the whole point. So, anyone resonate with that message? I thought it was amazing myself. Yeah, Lexi, perfect. Yeah, it's good, isn't it, Lexi? Right on the mark with what? Even what you were saying about how you're being led to dance more, if I remember rightly, and just have more joy. Sam, in so many areas of my life. Yeah, find joy to raise the vibration. Yeah, look, joy really does raise the vibration. Like I know when I walked into that petrol station and people were so tense wearing their masks, and then they see me with this ridiculous mask. This old guy who looked really tense looked at me and he just pissed himself laughing. And he goes, "That is an interesting mask." I said, "Thank you." And he's shaking his head going, "And it complies." He said, "It's kind of just around your mouth." I got my jumper in this ridiculous way. And I noticed that the whole petrol station just relaxed, like literally, like everyone just relaxed, even the shopkeepers having a bit of a giggle. And it just relaxed the whole atmosphere. So we can often be a light by doing that. Noeline been totally creative for the past couple of months. So yeah, that's why my feeling has been I'm just balancing the two. Every now and again, I remind myself that I have freedom of choice. And every now and again, I remind myself that sometimes, even though I know I've got it, I choose to just go along with it for the sake of others and make it a funny experience and help reach the light in another way. So this has been my little fun journey with the whole thing while actually educating and things like that. Miko's been around Master Smiling. Yeah, it's great you're doing that, Miko. It's like Sammy's the same. She's a friend called Denny, who we know. Denny's this absolute, Denny's a lot like you, Miko. And if you haven't met her, you really should. She runs a herb shop over here in Fremantle, and her rule is that you can't enter her shop wearing a mask. So if you actually go in the shop wearing a mask, she says, "There's plenty of shops that want your mask. Get out of here and go there, or take your mask off this instant, or I won't serve you." And people quickly take their mask off. So you would love her. She's just absolutely right up your alley. So yeah, I'll connect you if you want, because she's also a brilliant herbalist as well. Very good. Yeah. No, you should connect with her. I think you'll get right off with her. And she needs some support right now because she's standing pretty firm in her community and not finding it easy. So, okay. So now the other thing with this I Ching reading too is there's a thing called the lines. There's like 6 changing lines. Now, although there's no movement of lines, when I did a muscle test intuitive reading, I got line 2. So this gives a bit more detail to the reading. So what this is saying is enthusiasm can throw you out of balance. So it's important to retain balance and hold firm to your truth and ideals. You won't have to wait long to take action. Once you do act, you'll need perseverance, but likely a fortunate outcome. James the Corn says proper discrimination knows when to act and when to refrain from action. Firm and stable like a rock. Do not wait a whole day, which basically means intuition and foresight. Persist and you'll have good fortune. The man is quiet yet firm as a rock, sensitive to the first imperceptible signs of impending changes. He does not delay in taking action. So what this is basically saying is that there is a little bit of patience that's going to be needed with this whole thing, but at the same time, don't wait too long to take action. As soon as you know what to do, you do it. That's what it's basically saying. So it's a bit of a clarifier. It's also saying being mindful not to let your enthusiasm go over the top. So in the same way that many who are complying blindly out of fear, the danger is you can go against the principles of the art of war, and I've been teaching my friend Denny this, and run around so frenetically that you actually put yourself out of balance, and then they can come after you. And it's funny because Denny's probably, I'm one of the only people she'll listen to because she knows my history with the law reform and that. And I just said to her, look, Denny, you will lose if you keep running around frenetically. You'll just exhaust yourself. So I said, you just got to kind of hold firm to your truth, but also center yourself and be patient. Team up with people because this is a long-term war. This is going to take time to win this war, but we will win if we're patient and calm and we act and we keep moving and know the time and seasons. And this is what this is saying. So the secret to military strategy is to know when to act and when to hold back from action. Even the greatest armies in history, if you study the art of war, who'd go hard, they take times of rest and integration and not acting. George Washington was well known for doing his military strategy. When he won the Civil War when greatly outnumbered, he would lead people after a win, he would take times of rest. One of the greatest Chinese generals who had extraordinary victories, he was well known for his unusually good treatment of his troops. He would nourish his troops, make sure they were celebrating and having fun. And he always saw the importance of nourishing their souls, taking good care of them and making sure his troops were well fed and full of joy. And whereas the other armies would be running frenetically attacking, they'd run out of breath and then he would wait and go. He was often criticized because he would delay from taking action for so long, people would see him as kind of weak and not moving fast enough. But then in hindsight, they would realize the wisdom of what he had done and him waiting the right timing. So really right now in this time of the world, it's good to realize history. This oracle so spoke to me because the message I was getting is the time is to act, but also just wait and move slowly and plan in the background. This is the time to plan. This is the time to be strategic, the time to have joy, to nourish, to connect and start to plan and plan your action. And they said, too quick a strike and they're ready for you. But one lesson that we can learn from Melbourne is, for example, right now, as in Melbourne, I have friends and my business partner in Melbourne who've told me that right now, the government's got exhausted with forcing restrictions. The police literally don't want to do it anymore. People are just walking out without masks, even with there's mandates, and no one finds them. The police see them and just wave at them and leave them alone. So, in other words, these kind of governments doing this kind of thing, if the people remain calm, remain strategic and keep moving and know when to strike, I see a very fortunate outcome. I see an extraordinarily good result from all of this that people could never contemplate if people can stay calm in the midst of the storm. And even though the next 3 months is going to be a whirlwind and everything in you is going to want to scream and run around as you see the media hitting, you read things about COVID digital passports, you read things about this, you read things about that. So there are parts of the world that unfortunately will go fully into that timeline of the mark of the beast and things like that. And I've been told we've got 2 years to be a group who do not. So in other words, some groups will go there, and if those who choose not to act over 2 years and country groups and people groups, that's where they'll be heading towards that place where it'll be a case of life or death. So we are fortunate now we still have time to act and move, and we have patience and we're being divinely led. So Ecclesiastes 3, everything there is a season, a time to every purpose under heaven, a time to be born, a time to die, a time to plant, a time to pluck up what's planted, a time to kill, a time to heal, a time to break down, a time to build up, a time to weep, a time to laugh, a time to warn, and a time to dance, a time to cast away stones, a time to gather stones, a time to embrace, a time to refrain from embracing, A time to gain and make lots of profits on cryptocurrencies. A time to lose, consolidate, and not, and basically consolidate your gains that you've got, and basically take some time out and even take a few short-term losses on your long-term holdings. A time to keep and hold on to your assets and stand firm with your wealth and sovereignty. And a time to cast it away, evolve, let go, and move on in the same way that summer, autumn, winter, spring. Autumn, you cast away. Spring, you start to grow. Summer, you expand. A time to rend and a time to sow. A time to keep silent, to say nothing at all when everyone else is running around you frenetic. And a time when everybody else is being silent, to speak out and say, I will not be silent. A time to love when everybody else is full of hate, fear, division, and absolutely speaking and spewing forth toxic filth on Facebook, and you becoming the voice of love and reason in the midst. And a time to hate when everyone's being lovey-dovey and being all sweet and saying it's all good and going to work out. And when you become the voice that says, I hate this evil and I'm not going to sit here and put up with this shit. A time of war when everyone else is complacent and thinking it's all fine and living there in a dream world. And a time of peace when everybody else is at war and you become the one who moves peace. The secret of this whole passage is to be a contrarian. You learn that in investing. You learn that in business. You learn that in all areas of your life, the power of contrary motion. A time to actually know the times and seasons and know when to do the opposite. I know right now, for example, even yesterday, I got an update on this amazing cryptocurrency subscription I'm in, which we've been doing very well in. And he actually said, now's the time to strike for the rally. He said, some of his recommendations I gave you maximum buy-in price, even though it looks crazy because they've already gone up 500%, I'm going to recommend going and get some more again. He said, we're about to hit the insanity in the next little while. And he's hardly ever got it wrong yet. So, whereas by contrast, there was times before when he was saying, when everyone else was saying buy, he's saying, no, the bear market is not over yet. It's time to basically just hold back, hold long-term hold, and don't get too caught up with the losses you're having for now. So that's a secret to great investing. And those of you who invest or do anything to do with money know this. And the secret also to being sensitive. Sometimes embracing someone and a hug is what they need. Sometimes it's to refrain. I know there's nothing I hate more when I'm, for example, having a really, really, really deep, and I used to remember in church, deep encounter with Christ and weeping because I was feeling the presence of God healing my heart. And I'd have some lady walk up and start to try and hug me and hold me and like to reassure me. And I just want to say, fuck off. Like, I don't want you to hug me. There's other times I do want a really good hug. And I'm sure we all know what you mean. So this is all about learning and discrimination, times and seasons and wisdom in our life. And this is what brings greatness and the difference between people who will succeed in finances, in health, in freeing their society and in your purpose and mission and in whatever you're doing, and those who simply are what I call a feather in the wind that come quickly and blow away just as fast. Okay, so that was a little bit of a download. Who basically could really resonate with that? Yeah, wow, it just sort of came from my heart, that. I loved it myself. It was like, wow, it's speaking to me. Great head spinning, yeah. You know, in Master Severe, I actually had Yeshua turn up last night. I woke up at about 1:30 and he's speaking to me and teaching me some very deep things and speaking to me about everything that's going on and what's happening, and had not felt the peace I felt was so deep, and showing me things and what my path was next and what to learn. So there's so much help right now. And yes, remember Yeshua himself was at peace in the storm when all his disciples were freaking out. So that's the biggest message for everyone right now. Just be absolute peace in the midst of the storm. That's how you can calm your community down too. When everyone else is freaking out, you become the one they look to because you're as calm can be. Lexi says, follow your inner guide. Yep, I couldn't agree more, Lexi, because you will get guided. And the moment you get into emotion, the inner guide shuts off. So this is a really good message for us for planet Earth right now and in our lives. It's really a revelation and awakening is actually happening right now. So when darkness comes, it's to shut out what I see as the old way of being. When we're still getting pleasure from an old way of being, existing or functioning. Okay, so someone's mic's on. Yeah, so basically, so the dark night of the soul, when everything is lost and all seems darkness, all that's happening is your attachment to things that you once loved is an old way of being is dying off. I can remember when I used to get great joy out of being a really creative accountant, tax planner, and doing seminars at big groups. It was such a great experience for me. And I remember, though, as some time went by, it hit a point when I was no longer motivated by it. And it actually frightened me. I thought, shivers, well, if I don't get motivated, what's going to happen to business? What's going to happen to my life, purpose, everything? And I fought so hard to hold on to it. I spoke, I taught, but it was like my messages were dying. My clients could feel it, and people stopped coming to my seminars. This is about 7 or 8 years ago. And eventually I stopped fighting it, and I started to think, okay. And I went with the changes. And as soon as I went with the changes, and even though it seemed to make no sense, and let go of it and started doing a whole new form of webinar that aligned with my true soul purpose and that inspired my heart, clients started coming again. But I'll tell you now, there was a dark night of the soul for me in business because I really was scared. I found I hated to, even though my law firm was making lots of money, I just didn't want to do it anymore. I found even though I was doing tax planning, I just did not want to do it anymore. Some of you've been experiencing that in your career. I just don't want to do it anymore. And what does that mean for me next? Like maybe even 2 years ago, when you needed money, you'd go and get a job. You'd go and get a job in a local, you get a few clients in your business. You'd go and get a job in a cafe or in a other shop or something, or you go and do something. And yet this time around, you're like, my head says I should do that, but everything in me says, no, I'm not doing this. It would just, I'd feel like I'd be compromising everything that I are. And you're often left in a state of bewilderment and a state of like panic. And like, what does this mean for me? Like, how am I going to meet my bills? How am I going to do this? How am I going to change that? For some others of you, it can even be that you've seen the darkness of society, like West Australia especially is a really good example. Like now, like a state that's never known masks and never known the insanity the rest of the world has known has suddenly lost their virginity in it overnight. Their innocence has been hit. And at first I wept when I saw this for 2 days until I actually started to look at it differently and go, you know what? I'm already seeing people now starting to question who before weren't questioning. And that's why I suspect there's a few more of these events in WA to come yet, because as it starts to get dark, people start to question and start to go inward and start to look more and say, hang on a sec, what are we missing here? What is it that we actually really do want here? And I actually realized that in a way, this is doing a favor for what we've been trying to achieve. I got to the point where a month ago, I can honestly tell you, but I remember sitting there one day and thinking, I can see the vision that I have for our state, for our country, our world, but I just don't see how people are going to get it. It's like people just aren't seeing it. And I really genuinely am perplexed. I don't have the answers. I really am lost. And then what's happening now, I look at it differently and go, wow, this is really, in a way, giving people an opportunity to save a bit of pain and experience some real pain that hits them in their daily life and hits all of us in our daily life in things like going to the cafe and going out to the shops and seeing things going on, but makes us think, hang on a sec, is this the way of life we really want? So that's a dark night of the soul in full, basically, purpose. That's how it's working out. It's designed to stop you in your tracks. So you stop holding on to the things and getting sustenance from the things that otherwise karmically will take you off your path and cause you to repeat the past life patterns that you've come here this lifetime to reverse and end those things, so you can basically learn your lessons and either ascend or at the very least make sure that you basically come back in a much better form to this world that's going to be a far better way. And Mika says, wow, I was crying so much too last week. Yeah, I was a mess, Miko, for about 3 days. I really was. And once I processed the whole thing and looked at it from his perspective, I I still felt the pain, but I changed. I actually saw, like, you know what, this is an answer to prayer. This is actually a hidden blessing. It really is giving an opportunity to wake this state up, because there's people now who are actually thinking more now. People who would never in a million years even thought about pushing back, who are now talking about, I don't know how to push back, but we've got to push back somehow. I've got people who are kind of clashing with me on Facebook about things now reaching out to me and kind of saying, let's just bury our hatchet, so to speak, because I think we really need to do something and, you know, be on the same page as best as possible. And I said, I couldn't agree with you more. I don't agree with everything you do, but we got to be the same page. Like, she, for example, is a very good friend of mine in Bunbury, can't stand Mark McGowan. And I just said to her, look, I said, I appreciate your truth. And I said, I have a different truth to you on this whole thing, but let's just kind of, you know, whatever we do to push back, we've all got to make sure that the army of God remains united. And she's a mature enough woman to completely agree. And now we're sharing great wisdom with each other and both being real help to each other right now. So it's good. This time starts to give unity, starts to make you question. My day, I found I would do a lot of shit stirring, getting caught up in debates on Facebook. I'm finding now I'm going into toxic debates and aiming to moderate it and just say, come on, guys, let's just clean this up. This is not a time for citizens to turn against citizens. It's a time to see each other's perspective, because that's what a free democracy is about. A free democracy says, I may not agree with what you say, and I may strongly disagree, but you have the bloody right to say it. And you have the right to get up and give a ridiculous view on Facebook and me think you're an absolute clown, but I still respect you, and I'll sit down afterwards and have a snack with you in a respectful way and have a chuckle and watch a movie together. That's the hallmark of a free society. The hallmark of a tyrannical society is that basically there's a mainstream propaganda teaching of some kind and everyone must conform to it. And the reality is, whether we like it or not, the government leaders only reflect the consciousness of the individual members of society. So if we're seeing the rise of tyrannical governments that are not tolerant to people's viewpoints, we have to question where we're at as a people. How tolerant are we really of people's different perspectives? Really, how tolerant are we? I think most of my friends I know are actually highly intolerant. They just disguise it and pretend they are. So I'm now starting to become tolerant of the left myself. I'm starting to understand their perspective. I'm trying to see where they're coming from. I'm trying to see even where Joe Biden's coming from. I'm trying to see where all these people are coming from. I'm trying to understand where Bill Gates is coming from. It's not always easy, but I tune in there. I try to see where Mark McGowan's coming from and put myself in his shoes. Like, where's he at? Where's his consciousness at? Why would he be recommending this? And what's been amazing for me as I do this, sometimes I see things from a new perspective, and it's helpful. It's helping me see possibilities to reach people, and already it's paying off. I'm finding that people who previously I couldn't get through to are starting to listen. So the dark night of the soul and the hero's journey opens the gates, because the great thing of the hero's journey is that although you go around a circle, there's a time when you come home. So Grace said it's called love. Yeah, I agree. Lexi, I'm tolerant, but I see a lot of self-interest still. Yeah, absolutely. I would agree with that, Lexi. And I'll challenge you and say, well, let's just all see what a self-interest is in us. Because whatever we see, and you're a wise teacher yourself, so you would know that the seer and the seer are one and the same. So it's always good to purge yourself a little bit harder. So yeah, I've become tougher in myself than I've ever come before, because I'm like, that's what's going to change the state. That's what's going to change our country. That's what's going to sort people out. So yeah, had the same thought, love it. I mean, sometimes, Lexi, I'm a total narcissist. And I mean, Grace would agree with that. Sometimes I'm just like, absolutely, it's all about me. And even a little while ago, Grace said, gosh, it's always all about you, isn't it? I said, absolutely. And she burst out laughing, goes, gosh, you're an arsehole. I said, oh, I own the fact I'm an arsehole. I said, sometimes I'm terribly unreasonable. I still have moments when someone shares their point of view. I say it's a ridiculous view and I block them on Facebook. And then I go, oh, hang on a sec. I just went against everything I've been saying, and I remind myself and quickly pull myself in the line. So we're all on a journey here right now, and we're all going to make mistakes in our journey, and we're all going to learn and keep learning from our lessons. And truth is, we're a fucked up species, and it's time to kind of change that and mature ourselves in our inward walk and move into a deeper layer of love than we've ever before. I personally am at a point where I don't think I've ever had such a hunger But when Christ said to be like Christ, in other words, Christ was a badass, but yet he had a lot of compassion and love. Christ had an ability to love people and understand people in a way that I used to just marvel how he would do it. Christ had an ability to attack systems and authorities with a boldness and fierceness that I would just sit there and go, how does he do that? So when you start to step more into love and step more into changing the way you see things, you start to grow in consciousness and you start to also get tougher. You will find you will become more vicious towards things that you don't like, and you will know the right enemy to hit. Because sometimes when we're judgmental without realizing it, we start hitting the wrong enemy rather than going for the real enemy and then absolutely viciously going in there with a sword to cut their head off, not just basically have a fight with them. It's one of the things you'll love about Raymond Grace when he speaks. I mean, Raymond Grace openly says evil people deserve to die. If he's asked to deal energetically with, say, pedophiles, he will go in there and absolutely attack. You know, he will do like this vicious kind of shamanic work that I've never seen anyone else do, and it inspired me, and I do that kind of work myself now. So Raymond shared one story, for example, about a guy who'd actually abused a woman who was in his seminar and really affected her. So he did some work where he went back in time, and as the abuser was about to abuse her, he grabbed him. He said, I punched him in the face, smashed his head against the wall and cut his throat and made sure he bled before I killed him. And then he said, then he said, literally, the woman couldn't believe it. She felt the energy to shift from her. And of course, some people in the seminar you could see were struggling with that. Whereas I go, oh, I just love it. You know, he just went straight after it. He said, well, someone's about to abuse a woman. And then he said, why would you not do that? He just smashes your perceptions. I look forward to him speaking. So this is where the hero's journey and that actually going through that supreme ordeal, which is what we're experiencing, it's actually so we can move into step 3 to return with an elixir of power, gifts and boons to bestow upon humanity. In other words, the hero's journey, in a way, is here the circle. You go through the resistance, which is the first quarter. You go through the descent into the abyss, where you're kind of going through the dark night. Then you go into the ascent, where you start to come back and you start to actually move back out of it. And then you hit that time when you move into the final quarter, when you come on the last leg home, when you're starting to round the finishing straight to run home to the tape. And where everything that you walked away from for your journey, you now come back, but as a new individual than you did before. Hannah Hurnan's book, Hind's Feet in the High Places, is about that much afraid girl who left in shame, where she was bullied, victimized, and her boundaries were not accepted, treated like dirt by her family, tried to force her into getting married. She went away into the high places. And then once she rounded those third thresholds and hit the resurrection point, she then moved into the world dancer, wrap-ups, the master of 2 worlds, where she had a deep desire to go back to her world and her family and the people she knew and help them so they could do the path. And she had this new love, appreciation, and compassion for them to reach them and actually help these people. The key is many people either one stay from making that final step, and that's why there is a period of time on the hero's journey as you're ascending and coming home, where you have a further what's called resistance to coming home. You become Simba in The Lion King. You're enjoying being out, having a Hakuna Matata, hanging out with those 2 little animals and enjoying the time of your life in the wilderness, until that moment finally says where it's time to come home and face Scar. By the way, I hope everyone here has seen The Lion King. Has everyone here seen it? In some form, or if not, I'll better explain it. Sam has, Christine, no. Pauline, yes. Sheldon, yes. Okay. So what The Lion King is it's in simple terms, it's a story goes where you've got this kind of big jungle and you've got Simba, who's a little cub lion, and his father is called Mufasa, who's a king. His uncle is Mufasa's brother Scar is kind of like the type of Satan. He's a really bad lion, and he's basically lives in the Pride Lands or outside in the Pride Lands, and Simba's told never to go there. And due to various things that happen, Mufasa gets tricked and gets killed, Scar gets in there and takes control of the kingdom and turns at the darkness, and Simba has to flee to hide in the wilderness, and goes on this kind of hero's journey where he goes through various things and grows up into a strong lion. And when he finally grows into a lion and he feels the call to go back to take on Scar and take back his kingdom, he doesn't really want to go because he likes living and he's afraid. And an encounter with his ancestor, his father, coming to him in a dream, gets him to go back and take on his nemesis, and ends up helping his people to get back their freedom. So the hero's journey is preparing you to become a leader in your society, in your field, in your community, wherever you happen to be. For Miko down in the Southwest, for Christine in Albany, Lexi in Virginia, Sheldon in Canada, and everyone else happens to be here wherever you are. So that's what the hero's journey is designed to do, to take you through the process and initiation to actually do the journey or do the path and step into it. So the hero's journey will always end up with a return. The ordeal, though, is like the descent and then getting you ready for the ascent again. So many of you right now are in this ascent because you're moving into the abyss. And until you get to the second threshold, which really means that you come to the point where being in the abyss you become comfortable with in absolute darkness, only then can you start your ascent. So Campbell's 17 stages, we've covered already the call to adventure, the refusal of the call, the supernatural aid coming to help you, the crossing the first threshold where you actually leave, the belly of the whale, which I know some of you have been feeling. I mean, who here feels like you're definitely in the belly of the whale or basically in the road of trials? Who definitely feels that? Like, that's definitely where you're at. You're in this kind of belly of the whale, road of trials, definitely humanity, where you're being really tested right now. Yeah, it's very much happening that way. And the thing to keep in mind is these are cycles. This will end. You'll come out a new person, and guess what? In the near future, you're going to have another one of them waiting as you go to your next stage of evolution. It's like the I Ching. It's like a wheel that just keeps turning until you finish your path and then ascend to the next layer. So that's what this is all about, this human experience. So it's getting you ready for greater ruling and reigning. So the road of trials, as we shared last week, is that test which you must undergo for ascension. The reason why people do not ascend and stay on samsara, the cycle of birth and rebirth, and let me emphasize this clearly, is because they run around and avoid the lessons they're here to learn. So I'll say it again. The reason why most people, a vast majority, stay stuck in samsara and continue to live the wheel of incarnation, rebirth and death, is because they skirt around like ferrets and avoid the lessons that they're here to learn. And the reality is, until you learn those lessons, you will keep coming back. And every time you skirt around like a ferret, it gets harder. Who knows what I mean? Who knows exactly what I mean when I say that? And every time you avoid a life lesson that you know you're meant to learn, it's harder. Lexi, damn ferret. Yeah, I said that for you, Lexi. I said to Lexi the other day, but I said she's one of the fastest ferrets I've ever met. She scuttles so fast that when you try and corner her, it's almost like you didn't even know that a ferret was there. So we've all got that ferret within us that just wants to scuttle away. So it's just critical to get through the trials and to stick the course and perseverance and toughen up. Personally, I think many sports persons and celebrities are far more ahead in consciousness than many spiritual warriors I know, because many of these people do it. Guys like Michael Jordan in basketball, he knows this kind of stuff. If I taught this and he was listening, he probably would be going, yeah, man, I get this. This is exactly how I, won these championships. I was talking to someone about Miley Cyrus, who openly worships Satan and that. And I said, truth is, she's probably more ahead of just about anyone I know when it comes to consciousness and scarcity. I said, she's got a great mindset around prosperity and she knows what she wants. So I said, many of these people, you can learn a lesson to show that the reason that we've been taken over by communism is where we've got fat through prosperity. Literally, we have. We're living in a world where people are fat through prosperity. And every society in history where that's happened, it gets eventually taken over by a stronger, organized, military disciplined group. Like you can just go back to Babylon, to Assyria, to Greece, to Rome. Rome basically winning in about 300 BC. Before that, Alexander the Great, who took basically over Persia. Persia then took over Babylon. Babylon took over Assyria. There's all kinds of things like that that was constantly happening. So complacent societies eventually get taken over because in their wealth, a complacency comes in, a kind of weakness comes in where things will always stay this way. People where their market shares are always going up, and no matter what they do, they keep going, start to think it's just going to keep going up. Even today, most people, you probably ask them, honestly believe that, you know, the Fed or someone will always come in and prop up the market. The stock market will never crash, like completely fall apart. We all know that it will. Eventually, it will run its cycle and it will collapse completely. I mean, I don't know when, but it will. And it's just something that we're in a society where we get fat and complacent and think we can do what we want. Eventually, we fall. US is happening right now. It's falling because it just believed it could keep printing money and keep living how they wanted to do and do whatever artificial intelligence, genetic modifications that they felt like. Atlantis was destroyed because Atlantis started to do all this, started to experiment with war technology, with frequencies, of creating vortexes and messing around with things, and literally caused a major blowing in the vortexes of the universe, a major damage. You know, things like that. Lemuria, basically, similar kind of thing. It collapsed because so societies collapse when they get complacent, and we see this with the West. The one thing I'm grateful for is I was fortunate enough to be brought up in churches that taught very early on the value of sacrifice and the value of going through challenges and hardships. So I chose to put myself through as many as I could when I was in my 20s. And Grace would remember this. I was concerned about how weak I was. I thought, I've grown up in a middle-class family. I've been cushioned. I wouldn't have a hope in basically being a missionary, or if bad things happen in society, I'd be screwed. I mean, I used to do crazy things like when Grace and I rented a house, you know, deliberately rent hot houses and be in houses for 9 months that had no air conditioning in ridiculous heat waves, and, you know, stayed at Grace's mum for many months where, you know, there's me, Grace, we had William, and then we had twins on the way, all bunched up in a small little room, like living in like a third world country, no TV, nothing for months and even years. You know, and living in severe heat where you had to literally, the only way you could get not hot was to actually put the fan on and keep going, having cold showers in the middle of the night and getting into bed wet. You know, that was the kind of stuff I went through for quite a while when building business, and when the cash flow wasn't quite flowing and my health was really bad. And I'm glad now for all those trials, because but for those trials, I would not be able to get up and lead the work that I'm doing today and do the kind of work that I'm doing it. Yeah, and Grace chose to go through those, and, you know, she was a great support, and that's why we're still close, and that's why she is a tough nut herself. That's why with the boys, we made sure they didn't get fat through prosperity. We used to take them to secondhand Salvation Army toy shops and get $1 toys, even though basically we could have easily got a lot more. You know, chose to live a simple life, you know. Yeah, so Grace chose to have a challenging life herself and really go through that. That's why she's tough as nails. She was a good influence on me because she grew up in the Philippines, sleeping with rats, and she manifested a, you know, horrendous childhood. So I was fortunate enough to have a childhood where I was bullied a lot and my mum was atrocious to me. So it trained me up very quickly to learn about the dark feminine and heal my wounds and learn how to deal with it. So once you start to see that, you change your perspective on it. You go, shit, we've got to toughen up. I mean, most people, even walking into a shop out wearing a mask, the truth is you'd be terrified, even if that was your truth. Some of you, it's not your truth. You're actually fine. I've got a very evolved chiropractor friend of mine who doesn't have a slightest problem with masks and thinks they're good. And it's good, but it's different. And this is not a guy that's caught in the system. He's a brilliant chiro. He knows a lot of alternate stuff. He just says, yeah, he goes, look, I can see your point. He goes, I don't have a problem with it myself. He said, I think they're a good thing for 2 weeks in WA, stopping the spread. And he said, I know COVID's definitely overreacted, but He said, whatever I think doesn't matter because the rest of Perth believe that. So I just said to him, well, I really appreciate the fact you give me a better perspective, because I said, I don't agree with everything you're saying there, but I appreciate the fact you have a different perspective to me. And he goes, yeah. And he goes, I like the fact you have because it makes me think. So this is the nature. And Miko says, I had that many challenges, I might be a sucker for pain. Well, Miko, you chose to come here and get your ass spanked every time you went off path, because all of us here, no doubt in many lifetimes, we come there to complete our path and we get caught up with distractions and we avoid the road of trials. So in a way, I think many of us chose to incarnate in some shocking childhoods to ensure that we didn't repeat those patterns. Who can relate to all this, by the way? Who can relate and go, yeah, I can actually see now that my trials and what I've been through have really been a valuable ally in my journey. Yeah, Miko, well, yeah, look, you've been fortunate enough to have abusive partners, Miko, and a shocking childhood. So all that helps you to learn to be strong. Amy made a profound comment to me the other day because she was severely bullied as a kid. And when she went out to the market without a mask and did all that kind of stuff. And I said, do you feel the daggers? She goes, oh, absolutely, I feel the daggers. And she said, you know what? I just say, bring it on, bitches. She said, I grew up being bullied. I had kids just taunt me, humiliate me, break my spirit, left me a mess. I learned to get strong. So she goes, I just say, bring it on, bitches. Come on, give me your best. And I just pissed myself laughing. And, Denny was the same. So you can see how trials actually make you strong. They get you to the point where, no doubt Donald Trump had some horrendous trials. So it's really critical because even though you fail in some of your trials, the trials prepare you. The fact that I failed dismally in the first church that I built with grace, with Fruitful Vine, and gave up my power and did everything differently to what the Father told me to do, and destroyed the church by my weakness and failure to step in my power, which left me a bit of a mess, and I got my ass kicked for by the Father, is the reason why now with City Awakening, working with grace, I don't give up my power. Why she doesn't give up her power, and she knows what she's meant to do, and we don't really fight. We act, whereas in other works we've done, we always end up fighting and conflicting and getting into competition. This work in our businesses, we don't. We literally work together beautifully because we've learned that. So the great thing about trials and tests is they toughen you up. They get you strong. They prepare you. And when you get to the point when you actually start to embrace them and enjoy them, you start to even give thanks for your trials and do what Paul says, in everything give thanks. Because you start to realize that what the Buddhists say and the Hindus teach is that suffering is an illusion. And once you transcend and realize suffering and pleasure are one and the same, that's when you've entered nirvana and you ascend. So we're really in this journey to learn that and to learn the value of all that we go through. So James says, my brethren, count it all joy when you fall into various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces patience. But let patience have its perfect work, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking nothing. I love that. But you may be perfect and complete, lacking nothing. And the truth is, and some of you would have noticed that, the Lord's Prayer even says, lead us not into temptation. In other words, there's actually a prayer you can do, which says, keep me from getting off path. Because Yonggi Cho, who's a great teacher, gave 2 different levels of trials that people tend to go through, okay? So there's 2 different trials that people go through. The first basic level of trial is what's called, I haven't got a slide for this, so what I'm going to do is just put a slide up and do this. There's 2 different levels of what's called trials. There's what's called the lead us not the temptation trials. And then there's what's called deliver us from evil trials. So what these basically mean in simple English is this. Lead us not the temptation trials are trials resulting from you getting distracted. By becoming lazy, you open a door. It's those kind of trials. It's ones where Satan gets into you, or you invite Satan in by inaction and temptation, getting caught up in matter. So a good example there is you just know that you're meant to be disciplined and do a certain thing, and you just don't do it. You know that a particular relationship is very, very poor for you. Alexa, your video's on. you know that a certain relationship is very basically, not good for you. I remember there was a particular girl who I met in 1992. She was blonde, absolutely fantastic looking. She was really into me. Everything in me wanted to date her, and everything in my gut was telling me, do not date this girl. She's not right for you. And I suffered for a month. I fortunately, that one I did obey. Years later, I found out when she got married and got happened to marriage, just diabolical stories of she was just like an absolute psycho, apparently. And I was like, gosh, I'm glad I didn't go into that one. So I was told clearly, do not go with this woman. So trials like this is the ones where you actually do something you've been told not to do. You open the door. You're clearly told, for example, stay put. Like, let's say you think, oh my gosh, West Australia is turning into a communist, or Queensland's going bad, I'm going to leave this state. And the voice says, no, just stand your ground. It's got to be fine. But you go, no. Fear takes over you. You ignore that. You listen to that voice. You flee. You go and buy a house and move somewhere else. And I know someone who did this very thing. Came back 3 months later, having lost a fortune, tail between their legs, with all kinds of mess going on in their life. That's the leader not in the temptation trial. That's one, or the other way around, where you may be told very clearly, as someone I've heard, you get a message telling you, leave now, leave this place, or don't stay in this job, or get out of this relationship. And you ignore that. I had this happen to me. There was a girl I was seeing some years ago, and I was getting this message saying, do not enter into a relationship with this girl. And next month I entered into a relationship because she put pressure on me, and I felt bad for her. And then within about 2 weeks, I had joint and arthritis hitting me, and all problems happened in my business. And I went through months of absolute torment. And it's when I look back, I just shook my head because I got a clear message: do not do it. So that's the leader not in the temptation trial. These are ones where you become lazy, you open a door, you break a specific. Another one is you break a specific truth of yours or karmically. That kind of stuff. So William says we become fat and lazy and complacent. Exactly. As a society, we've been led into temptation. We've been caught up in the allures of prosperity. Like we can go and get lots of Bitcoin and make money from it, or we can go and get this job, or, oh my gosh, how sucky that we can't go to our favorite strip club. Oh, I can't go to a pub. Even when the lockdown finished, everyone was racing down the pub. It was all over the media. They were packed. We could go back to the pub. Yay. And I'm like, oh my God, you've just been locked down and you're running to the pub celebrating. Fuck me. Excuse the French. That's what I was thinking. But I'm like, well, okay, I was like that once. I'm going to be kind and just remind myself. So William says, even with you and I, look what happened. Yeah, look, William and I were devastated with WA's lockdown. And I'll openly tell you, I bawled my eyes out and I was a mess for 36 hours. And the reason why was I blamed myself. And that might sound like the dumbest thing that, but I knew we'd been told to pray and be watchmen for the city and to keep doing work and clearing the energy. And we were doing that. And when we were doing it, it's like where everyone else was locking down, we weren't. Because I'd be shown a lockdown was pending. I'd get a clear sense and a warning. I'd go and do work and it wouldn't happen. And the government would get up and change what they were saying. Happened many times last year. But I got caught up with my foot. I got caught up with injury. And I just sat there absolutely shocked. I was devastated. I'm like, I cannot believe. And William was the same. He was a mess. And after we got through that and worked it all out, we learned our lessons. We made a bit of a promise to ourselves we wouldn't do it. But we also learned from the lesson that says, the reality is we can't carry things on our own. That's just ego. We've got to actually build a work and teach many to intercede, share the message, say anyone who cares about your state, you've got to become part of the army and get ready to work. We'll set up checklists. We'll teach you intercession. We'll teach you energy reading. We'll teach you that. And then you guys can all be rostered on. So all the time, or at least twice a day, we've got prayer happening for West Australia, for Queensland, for all the key places that basically people are at. So basically making sure spirits aren't getting in, setting up watchmen on the walls. Isaiah 62 says, I've set up watchmen upon the walls. They will give themselves no rest until he establishes Jerusalem and makes it a praise on the earth. That's what it says. It says, I've set watchmen on the walls. It says, they will give themselves no rest and give the Father no rest until he makes Jerusalem and Zion a praise in the earth. But same scripture says, for Zion's sake, I will not remain silent. In other words, Satan doesn't go to bed and have a week off and go on a vacation and go off to basically Hawaii and have a bikini shoot with Jezebel. He's constantly got things happening all the time, and their armies at work. So but at the same time, we are in a human body, so we do need rest. But this is why everyone's got to get involved and do their work. So Miko says, I got a download that told me to rest and X would be in trouble, but I ignored it. Oh, exactly. Yeah. Miko and Nenya, that's the lead, it's not the temptation. One. So deliver us from evil. This is a very different one. This is one which says it's kind of like a challenge from being in I'll call it a predetermined karmic challenge. Another one is from being in a situation with a community, for example, like whether we like it or not, although we could argue all the same, this is a situation where we could see evil pending. We can see vaccinations being, very hard to function without it. This is a deliver us from evil one. This is one where we say, okay, this is where keep us away from these situations or give us a guidance through it. Another one is, as Yvonne says, it's like keep us from all which distracts us from our purpose. In other words, free us from all which distracts us from our purpose. That's the best way to think about why. It's another way to think about one. So anything which is distracting us right now. So e.g., you may have a job you don't want to be doing, but you honestly can't see how to stop doing it because it's bringing the money in for the family. So you might just say, free me, show me the way through so that I'm not distracted from my purpose. That's an example of that one. Deliver us from evil. This could be that you've made the mistake and now you need help. Another way of putting it is you've made the mistake, now you need help. So you'll need help to get out of it. Like Miko, for example, goes to the next she's been warned not to, realizes she's made a really incorrect decision and says, okay, how can we redeem this and amend this fast? Deliver me from evil, Lord. That's that kind of situation. In my case, this was an example of this week. That was the kind of prayer William and I were doing. Deliver us from evil. We've let them in. Show us what's happened to our state. What spirits have got in that allowed this to happen? So William and I went demon hunting and we found the ones who got in and booted them out. And literally the next day after it happened, they got up and apologized for the lockdown. Mark McGowan totally changed his energy. And it was lovely to see.
Remember they were pretty big ones too.
Oh yeah, they were horrible ones.
They were like the biggest of the biggest.
Yeah, the biggest of the biggest. I agree.
It was pretty well, to be honest. All those clearings that we did was all pretty crazy because there was always a huge shift in the energy.
Well, I think I said to you, William, but to this day, I've never in my life had so big a shift of energy and seems to be a clearing as what happened that night. I was crying next day all day.
Well, to be honest, I was the same because when I woke up, I felt this whole new energy that I've never felt before in my life.
Yeah, you're the same, Ben. Yeah, no, I think you were the same. You softened up, and then you and I even healed things between us that for years we hadn't been close and all got healed.
Well, yeah, that's because it helped. It not only helped the state, but it helped us as well. Well, because it brought down that hard armor that we placed upon ourselves, and it got us to take it off and soften up again.
Yeah, well, we just broke. Like you and I broke through that. It was like a breaking in our hearts. The fallow ground broke. We just sobbed. We really got soft. And the big thing I remember, William, is remember when we first measured the energy, it had literally gone down to as low as what New York would almost be, which is like below 1,000. Which Raymond said, when the energy of a city gets below 1,000, you're literally in full demon possession of the leadership and the people.
Oh,
yeah.
Holy. Okay, that's crazy.
Yeah, we had a 900 energy reading, which is like, to give you an idea, New York is 0, Washington's 100, Melbourne's very low. Many of the worst cities of the earth, all between 0 to 1,000, and Perth was like 1,000 on basically Monday night.
Oh
Yeah.
no. Well, as well we jumped onto that.
Yeah, once we'd done a couple of days of work, and I always checked it with Raymond to make sure. He just said, "Yep, your city's gone back to 25,000." He said, "Brilliant." He said, "That's what it was before." Miko, how do you measure it? Yeah, look, it's an international dowsing standard, Miko, that Raymond's created for dowsers to actually measure energy cities and regions to help know when cities are getting out of balance. So when he trained at SNAP, so yeah, we were trained in using pendulums, using bobbers and things like that. So I flew to Virginia and did a number of courses with him and various other dowsers and trained myself over a fair period of time on how to do it. So yeah, what I'm planning to do is for an intercession group is teach people to do that, to be able to measure it. So there's a dowsing standard that Raymond and many of the dowsers worldwide have set up. So as an example, in 2001, the energy of the planet started to exponentially increase. And at the same time, the Schumann resonance started to increase as well. And in 2013, it shot up even more. So what's actually happening is you've got to be at a higher and higher energy to cope with the changes in the planet. So as Raymond said, he's finding now that if you're less than 135,000 now, you're generally going to be having challenges with the energy of the planet. And if you're, whereas say back in 2001, it was only about 10,000. He found that the city, if a city was about 5,000 energy at that time, it was okay. Now he said it wants to be at least 20,000 to be in a reasonable state of okay, at least to be a good city. So Perth's now over that. But yeah, obviously he said you want to get to cities to the point where you get like to 50, 100. So the highest he got me up to was 300,000 at one stage in one workshop I did. And I felt like I was buzzing. So yeah, he does everything. Like you can measure demon possession. Like he told me that, for example, demons, when people take hardcore acid drugs and lose their mind, he said is the highest form of demon possession. And he finds that the hardest spirits to get out. He said alcohol, getting drunk a lot also creates a very high level of demon possession. He said going to most churches does the same. Then there's certain like emotions that cause it. It's very interesting. So I'm going to get him to share as much as he can when he comes, but I found it all very valuable. So who's looking forward to hear Raymond speak now? It really helped.
I certainly am.
Yeah, do you remember when you came, William? Because William, James, and Edward all came, and Raymond had never had kids in his workshop before.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that was a while ago now. I was like 14 then.
Yeah, and they loved it.
I still remember it all.
Yeah, you still remember it, don't you?
Yeah, it was great. But I couldn't stop laughing when I saw him walk in dressed like that.
Like what?
Well, like a full cowboy. He had the cowboy hat. He had that holster. He had a gun in the holster. He had a huge hunting knife. And he just, I mean, to most people, it looks ridiculous because you would think he'd be a serious spiritual master, like maybe just sitting in that position, meditating. But then you see this guy with this full-on cowboy outfit with a gun and a hunting knife.
Yeah, he brings it a real pistol. It's loaded too. And yeah, you guys, James and Edward kept giggling, remember? They absolutely loved it.
Yeah, well, we all couldn't stop laughing.
Yeah, and
that was hilarious.
And what William, James, and Edward loved with him too was he actually taught them how to use energy on the ice cream to raise the vibration so they could eat chocolate and ice cream and turn it into healthy food. And he was teaching us how to do that with food. So we were going out we couldn't find any healthy shops in the place. So we were going and buying these greasy burgers, doing dowsing on them until we raised the energy up, and then we'd eat them and they would taste like a whole organic meal and everything. You remember that, William?
Yeah, I do actually, especially the ice cream.
I think you still do it with chocolate, don't you? I know James said he still, douses his food to this day to raise the vibration.
Well, oh yeah, I do because it's just so quick. It's a very quick thing, but it's very effective.
Yeah, well, I remember him sharing that his daughter April one time, she was eating this ice cream and she heard him speaking that, everything is energy and it can be transformed. And if you think you can do it, you can do it. And she said to him, so does that mean I could turn my ice cream into healthy food that would actually be medicine to my body? He said, no, you couldn't do that. And he goes, didn't you just say that you could do anything that you believed in? And he just said, out of the mouth of babes. He goes, okay. He goes, well, if you say that, let's see what we can do. So he said, I'll make you a deal. He goes, if you can douse your ice cream so it goes to a positive vibration, because generally he said ice cream would be measured at about -20 on his scale. He said, and she got it up to about +10. So he goes, wow, okay. And he said she got herself to the point where she's eating ice cream. It was actually helping her lose weight and look good and everything. So Miko loves this.
There you go then.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sure a lot of people would love that. A lot of people would love that one, I'm sure, right?
Oh, exactly.
Really good. Look at Miko. She's loving it.
Oh, absolutely.
But no, I'm certainly excited to hear Aim and Grace.
Yeah. No, exactly. It's going to be fun. Miko teach me, yeah. Yeah, no, we can do it. No, Miko, that's what we plan to do. We want to keep people learning this in every single city. Lexi says he uses it to find clean water, right? Yeah, no, he does, Lexi. Like the Virginia government actually secretly come to him and ask him to help him when they have water pollution. And because what he finds is that over a period of weeks, he can transform a lake until it eventually purifies out. So he does it with water at the seminars. Like he'd get tap water out and he would then ask us to drink the tap water. It tasted like shit. And then he would douse it with us and then we drink it. It'd be like drinking pure organic water. And he would do that with he would do that for the Virginia government. They even used to get him to come and hunt down serial killers using dowsing and using bobbers. So yeah, no, he does. Lexi, wow, would love to talk to him about a waterfall nearby. Oh yeah, no, well, I know you live very close to him, don't you, Lexi, in Virginia? So yeah, I'm going to mention that because if he hears that and he knows you want to do some work over there, I'm sure he'll be. He always likes connecting with local people. He says to be involved in his projects. So yeah. So you can see here who finds this different levels of trials really useful. When I learned this, it was so helpful. This was Paul Youngie Cho, who's probably who had the biggest church in the world at once in South Korea. It's good, isn't it? Yeah, absolutely, Mika. Yeah, you can raise the vibration of Margaret River. That's the aim. What we're going to do in the intercession is teach people this, who are and say get to work, and then get people to the point where you're proficient in your region, where you can then teach others in your region, and get a group together, and then you all start doing it together. So that's how it's going to work, and then you can help others raise the vibration. And then the secret is you got to test into these what's called, check in, because you can get delusional, and so that's why I regularly check in with Raymond and make sure I'm not getting caught up. Because I remember occasionally I was convinced I'd raised West Australia to this amazing vibration. And I checked with him. He said, well, I'm not getting that. He said, I'm getting that your council nearby you still possessed. And I was like, oh, shit, I missed that one. So that's why having, other people around you, having a dowsing and intercession kind of community, an intercession type of network and grid and structure, you can see we can start to raise the vibration very, very quickly and raise the vibration of the people. Because once you can break the mind control of the people very quickly and of society, people start to wake up and become much easier to bring action. So this is why we did the hero's journey and the road of trials, and I mentioned this. So this is why it's so important to grow your state or consciousness. And you may remember last week I shared that we would, I'd cover this week. So I'm just going to mention a little bit about this today. So the state, I'm going to try and simplify this for you. It's very important to realize there's a very big difference between having city powers or abilities, which means the ability to tap into realms and consciousness and do great energy work, and having a character structure shown in your actions and lifestyle and maturity that actually helps you to not end up, exhausting yourself or letting shadows come up. And the more you grow in consciousness without resolving character structure deficiencies, the worse those shadows tend to be. That's why you'll end up seeing things like that guy who ran that yoga school that was so big in America. I can't remember him, but he actually they found he was sleeping with all the women. So all the yoga.
Yogi Bhajan.
Yogi Bhajan?
Yeah, Kundalini yoga. Who's out
that's
of
the
New
guy.
Mexico.
Oh, great. Yeah, thanks, Lexi. Yeah, so that's a classic example. He'd learned to move in great state of consciousness, probably even grown his maturity, but had shadows in his second rung of tier 1, which were really severe, and he had not dealt with them. So this is why it's very important, if you're going to be effective in leading your community and in leading revolution and bringing change in society and bringing also change in your own life and navigate the dark night of the soul, to grow in maturity and character. And that's why you go through trials. Trials are a way of getting you toughened up. Most people go through involuntary trials, whereas the best trials are the ones that you choose yourself. The ones where you say, bring it on, baby. Let me grow. I just want to grow. Bring it on. When you're being told you got to be reined in, bring it on. When you're being told you're going to go through a real challenge in your business, okay, bring it on. Let's get good. All this kind of stuff, bring it on. So learning to master higher states of consciousness. And that is the whole key to build a whole new evolved society. And then William, after you say that, it happens within the day. Oh, absolutely, yeah. Well, last week I taught about this, and then after the webinar, as it was ending, Mark McGowan announced lockdown. So he was like, okay, let's just give you and your group a little bit of a test and see how serious you are. And we're like, okay, well, thanks for the test. So
I was welcoming the trials, and then that lockdown happened, and I'm like, oh, okay then.
Yeah, so I go, okay, you guys sound like you're saying good stuff. Let's see if you can live it in your real spiritual life, in your state, or whether you're gonna, lose your way.
Well, it's crazy because when you say I welcome all the pain, then it comes within a day.
Exactly.
Then you're like, oh, I wasn't expecting it that fast.
Yeah, what's the sign of maturity when that happens?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so the main thing is I want everyone to understand and not get too lost, is to understand, and I'm happy to take questions at this time once I explain this if you don't get it. So state of consciousness, it's like you could be, let's say you could be a very low character, for example, like a very low maturity, but you could be like this Buddhist master who literally could lead people into extraordinary states of consciousness. He could get people to let go, almost levitate off the ground. They could move into deep altered states. They could become one with their higher God self, non-dual suchness. They would actually move, beyond materialistic into their soul, into their causal, into their witness state, into their non-dual suchness, where they felt like they no longer existed. Yet this same yogi the next day would be going off at people. He would be misogynistic. He'd be immature. He took everything personally. He'd start crying all the time and suddenly saying crazy things like, I think I'm going to go to hell and stuff like that. That's an example of a guy who has tremendous state, but he hasn't actually done really much personal growth or maturity. So does everyone get that basic concept? Is there anyone who doesn't? Because like I said, I really want to make sure you get that before I say anything more. So if everyone seems to get it, okay, great. Like I said, don't feel silly if you don't. I really do want to make sure people get this. So what I've mentioned here to give you a bit of a guide in a simple little checklist without being perfect is the gross or dense is materialistic, or the material world you see. The subtle moves into the soul or astral, is probably another way of putting it. So you move into the soul, or you move into the kind of astral. I mean, it says there causal astral kind of thing, like soul, astral. Then there's a causal astral, or the higher sort of self or oversoul, where you start to move into the higher astral realms, where you move into that kind of oversoul, what I call seventh to ninth dimensional. The witness, where you almost move into that Christ consciousness, where you really become like Christ, to become an avatar. You are linking with the masters, you're linking with Christ, you're linking with, Metatron. Then you move to the point non-dual suchness, where you actually suddenly feel like you're all of them, and you move into that oneness, and you feel like you're God, or you've returned home to the ineffable, invisible God, as Paul says in Colossians. So all that, you could be a very low state of character and move into that. So it's very important to realize that just because someone can do extraordinary work of state, and a classic is dark masters or sorcerers, they can do that. They can move to extraordinary levels of consciousness, further ahead than any of you guys can do here. They can, many of these dark masters can move in magic and miracles. I remember a friend telling me about this group of sorcerers who were very high up in the occult over in New Zealand, I think it was. And there was a couple of them snatching kids from a school. And the police decided they were going to catch them, so they were waiting, and they got them red-handed, and they had a bit of an ambush set up for these guys. So when the black limousine came in, which had been seen, there were police waiting for them because they'd been kind of tipped off. And then behind them, some other police came out of nowhere, and there was a coast. There was a school on the left, and there was a coast on the right with an ocean. There was no way to get away. So they had them. The limousine turned around, and as fast as it could, just drove straight towards the cliff. And as it went over the cliff, it disappeared in the thin air. So literally, whoever these dark masters were, they knew how to open portals. They may have had very low character growth, but they learnt secrets of great magic and great energy work. So they're separate things. And this is why many people even think that because they can do that, that they're a certain thing. And equally, the other way around, many people who have developed a good structure and character growth, they kind of almost find it hard to understand, like, how could that person be such a horrible person, but yet move in the high state? There was a healer, for example, that, a few of you I know work with, and you'll know who I mean, who I think had tremendous abilities to move in a state, but his character growth and structure was lacking quite a bit. And it definitely perplexed people here, I know you've all told me, until you understood this kind of principle as to how this guy could really do such phenomenal healing work, and he was really good. But then he, on the other hand, was not very well developed in these 3 tiers. And so, and the thing is, for many of people like that, and who I've met like that, they confuse the fact of consciousness with character. So the key today is to realize they really are 2 different things. When we're talking about character, the best way to think of it, in a simple way, is the first 6 levels or rungs of the tiers, is probably a better way of putting it, are about the individual. It's very much about you and growing your own consciousness. Tier 2 is where you become what I call a mover and shaker. It's where you become like a planetary leader. You become an integrated individual, as Ken Wilber puts it. You become integrated because you're starting to think about the collective, the world as a whole. In tier 1, the 6th rung, you're starting to step onto the kind of what I call the transition. The tier 2, you're starting to transition into that one. So, and then when you move to tier 2, you're basically on the 3 rungs. And when you move into tier 3, and that is something that Ken Wilber says, he has never met anyone on Earth yet who has actually moved into tier 3. So he said, as yet, he's never actually met one. So he says, the tier 3 kind of person, he says, or the one that's about the universe being as God, he said that's a level of consciousness where you actually move even beyond the planet and you become as God. You remember every past life of not only yourself, but of everyone around you, and of the Earth's history right up to when it was first formed. It's like it becomes your memory, every ancestor memory. So in other words, you are such a high level of character and structure now, you have become completely one with God. So everyone, you see everything for what it was. You see how everything formed. You see where it started. You see how it's ending. You see where there's no beginning and no ending. You see the Akashic records as like one whole thing, which relates to everyone. And there's different, and Sri Aurobindo, who was another consciousness teacher, talked about this, like supermind was one of them, for example, where you move into what's called a supermind. And then there's various levels that go even further, but the last one, of course, being where you actually become completely as God. So he he goes through this, and it's really quite fascinating. And it shows you so much about where we got to go. So Wilbur then also talks about this, which I shared last week, that if you want to develop your consciousness, you've got to be waking up, growing up, cleaning up, and showing up. So generally, if you're not growing, one of these things is lacking. So generally, if you start waking up, that's really good. Growing up is where you learn the work, but then showing up is really important. And many people fail to mature because they stop showing up. I remember when I was assigned to certain mentors, I would just keep showing up. Like Toby, I would show up and show up and show up. And when everyone else was skipping it because they were tired or someone else was going through a hard time, I'd show up. And that was why Toby said to me, wow, he said, you've gone further than almost anyone else. And it was only because I kept showing up. Cleaning up is where and Michael Jordan would agree with that. Great basketball player. When everyone else was exhausted, people were taking a day off, he'd be training. In other words, he would show up. He would show up on the field every single time. Cleaning up is where you're dealing with your shadow work, dealing with your pain, your fears, facing them head on, not being afraid to open yourself, not being afraid to deal with them, and not being afraid of the challenges that you go through as these things open up within you. So these are all things right now which many of you are now facing. And each of you would have probably one of these areas where you have a challenge. My sense is that most of you in the first two would be pretty much doing that. The fact that you're doing it, you're here at this group means you're definitely waking up and you're definitely growing up. The question you got to ask yourself, are you cleaning up and are you showing up? And this is what the dark night of the soul is about. Are you showing up or are you running around avoiding issues? Are you running around avoiding a situation? Are you running around avoiding working on that business that you know if you put the time into it, it would become a profit-making machine? Are you running around to all different things and all different activities rather than sticking to the one you feel you're going to get the most growth from? That's showing up. Showing up is showing up to where you know you got your lessons to learn. Cleaning up is where you face the stuff that you got to face within yourself. I'm cleaning up right now one of my shadows around I just don't like doing organization and systems in business. But that I'm realizing is something that, although it doesn't have to be my main thing, I still have to pay attention to it. I've been dealing with the weaknesses in my character that causes me to be like that. So shadow work is very important. Otherwise, your character and growth becomes stunted and you stop really growth. So that's why shadow work is such a big part of our work. So I'll just do a bit of a summary now of the states and the tiers and what they are. Anyone got any questions? Does everyone resonate with this? And are you finding this interesting? Are you enjoying this? Okay, excellent. Awesome. Great. Lexi, 1111. Oh, wow. Yeah, it is over where you are, isn't it? So, okay, so let's have a look at tier one. Now, I did say only 6 in tier 1 and 3 in tier 2. I've put one of them in tier 1, but it probably more, only because it helps with 7 chakras, it's more probably aligned with tier 2. But in saying that, some argue it's in tier 1. So there's divided thought about whether the 7th rung goes in tier 1 or tier 2. So it's a kind of in between one. So the first tier is a survival or fight and flight, or the first rung. So this is that primal desire or instinct to live. So one of the things that Wilbur shows is when you track the history of humanity, it's extraordinary how we've actually followed this. Yeah, Lexi, there's only a small difference between root and chakra sacral. I agree, Lexi. It's 12-12 up here, by the way. So it's the fight and flight. So generally, in the early days of humanity, in many races, this is how they were. They were very primal. They hunted and gathered in caves. They were instinctive sexually, like animals, raw instinct, connected to the earth, all that kind of stuff. Very primal at our origin. so many of humans, so to speak, in the human body. So the animal body, so to speak. So why we came as gods to raise the consciousness and help humanity raise. So basically, the second one here, the sacral, is sexual fantasy, raw instinct, creativity. So this is where, as Ken Wilber explains, imagine that you've got real shadows in these ones. Imagine generally that rungs 1 and 2 in a person's life is between about ages, I think, 0 through to about 7 or 0 to about 14, depending on which text you read. But generally, yeah, a baby goes through this. They grow up with this instinct to live. They're breathing, they're eating. Then you start to explore like that. You start to kind of explore the kind of creativity. You start to play. You're craving that. The sexual fantasy, as even Freud says, in a child is more just that. Another way of putting it is that connection with their mother, where they're getting fed that energy, where their parent and them. So Freud and Jung talk about this a lot. So kids who get damages in their first 3 to 4 years of their life, especially, will inevitably have shadows in these areas. So that's why many of us find that there's many wounds in the sexual area or wounds in the creative area, wounds in really being able to step out and just do raw instincts and overthink things at times and feel scared to really trust ourselves and just feel and just instinct and just go what feels natural to us and feels good. Most generally because there's been some kind of shadow or obstruction in character growth in these first 2 rungs. Like a parent has basically, cracked down on you as soon as you express your primal, like, good girls or good boys don't do that. You get shut down whenever you do be creative. In my case, my mum would always be like, good boys never fight and never get violent. So when I would wrestle or play stuff, so I ended up becoming a wussy, weak guy who was bullied very easy because of what I was trained, and I had to do a lot of work to clear all that out. So that's an example of those ones. The third one is those power drives. This is where your solar plexus. It's kind of like where I'm a god. I can do magic. I can find my power. It's when you learn to say no. You start exploring saying no. You start exploring finding power, exercising power. Basically experiencing power, feeling other people's power, feeling the power of Mother Earth. So this is where you start to actually think, I can do anything. So in proper correct character growth, this is what happens. And again, humanity, you will see this is what happened. Humanity went through a great period of magic and energy and kind of believing that everything was a god and everything was a spiritual event. And there was not really much structure. So generally those first 3 rungs, there's not a lot of structure really. It's exploring, it's learning, it's finding yourself out. That is why so many people are stuck right now in the 4th rung. And right now, Steve McDonald, who teaches this sort of stuff and is a very good teacher, explains that the world had moved into a rung 5. And now what's happening is it's doing what's called a standard event that happens in consciousness growth. You have 1 step forward to go 2 step, 1 step back to go 2 forward. He said, so what's happening now is you're having a kind of last ditch pushback from the black and white rung of consciousness of the earth to move us into the 6th one, where we're moving away from what's called a corporate mindset as a people into a social humanitarian responsibility, with social responsibility for our fellow brother and sister across the world, and where profiting from each other becomes less of a concern. And although we become we become more focused on the collective prosperity of the people of the world. So that's what happens when you start to evolve into the 6th one. So basically, the push is to move into that, which is almost like another way of putting the 5th dimension, because the 3rd eye, you start to move into the 5th dimension, or the 3rd eye chakra, where you start to move into that social responsibility, where you let go of what's called the rational mind of the 5th tier and the 4th tier or 4th rung, and we move into the 6th one, which is all about the 3rd eye, thinking intuitively, thinking beyond ourselves. And although we're individually taking care of ourselves, making sure that we all individually prosper, that we all individually do well as a planet, and we all individually really do well together. So tier 1 rung 4 is very much black and white. And a classic example of someone stuck in that is someone who's very religious, like that fundamentalist Christian, that absolute fundamentalist Islam, that person that you know who's very black and white, that lawyer who doesn't think, that person who's on Facebook who's just black and white, you know, this coronavirus is this, everyone should get vaccinated, it should be mandatory. You know, that's a rung 4 as an example. Or even the person who's reversed. COVID's a big fraud. You know, anyone who gets vaccinated is this, you know, everything has happened. Everyone's the enemy. That's also a sign of 4. You're stuck in that one too. Or you get very stuck in any kind of dogmatic belief system. In other words, you've blocked off your heart chakra and you're really caught up in that one. Whereas the whole aim of the rung 4 is when there's no shadows, is that you become defined very clearly, but your heart then steps you beyond that and you start to move into that throat where you start to speak out and start to move towards the first start of service. So the 5th rung is the start of service. It's where you start to see grey areas, you start to question them, you start to speak out, you start to see things logically, you start to develop achievement goals, you start to look at science, you start to consider business, you start to think of growing your wealth, you start to think of how to get better with money management, you start to become very, very good at things like that. Many people, what they do is that they jump, and generally there's no one rung that anyone's in. You'll generally be in a main one and then you'll be across another couple. Like, for example, you may be moving more into the 5th right now, but you're still a bit stuck in the 4th. And you've got some shadows in the 2nd and 3rd. And then you're tapping into the first beginnings of the 6th. Or you may be, as probably a lot of you here are, you're probably starting to really tap into that 6th now. You're still by and large in the 5, but you still got traces of the old shadows of the 4. And then you might have a few unresolved shadows from 1 or 2, which is where the shadow work comes in. So you start to see it all very differently. And when I first started to learn this stuff, so yeah, I would agree, Lexi. I would say where you're at, for example, is you're kind of you're basically moving towards a 6, but you've got unresolved work in the 5. That's how I describe you right now. That's why you're being led to really focus on your work, your purpose, on your on basically mastering your craft and getting really good. That's an example of where you're moving towards mastering that 5, so you can move more easily into the 6 and establish yourself there. So yeah, I would agree with you. That's where I would say you are. So when you start to move into that, you start to become less 4. You start to see things from a broader perspective. So when you're in a 6th rung, for example, you're starting to be less black and white. Even the 5th. The 5th is you're more questioning. You're not quite sure yet, but you're questioning. You're exploring possibilities. You're letting go of old beliefs. The 6th one, you've let go a lot of the black and white world way of thinking. What you do more is you see a place for it. And as Ken Wilber explains, what's critical to understand is that if you a correct and what's called a balanced and mature and a perfect way of moving into these rungs, which doesn't always happen in the real world from shadows, is that you integrate the other stages. So because you're now in a 6th tier, you're starting to actually you are very comfortable with achievement and goals. Like you'll notice that many of the great social humanitarian people of the world, an example is that I'll give you an example of a man who I think is very high consciousness, even though there's definitely a lot of dark shadows and things like that with him, which I don't think he ever resolved, is someone like Nelson Mandela. You know, someone who had a major, and you'll see what I mean as I go through this big way of thinking and had a lot of that huge vision for what he was doing. And even certain guys like Bill Gates and that, you'll actually find they're very high in these structures. And that's why they've got worldwide position they have. No doubt they have a huge amount of shadows in some of these areas, especially around the 4th, around the 5. There would be guys who probably are really not doing a lot of shadow work, as an example. And so you start to see them very differently and realize why many of these guys are starting to control the world, because they've actually grown a very high consciousness and state. And you can see why it's important for you to raise your consciousness while clearing out your shadows, because imagine dealing with the world authorities where you not only at their level of consciousness, but you also have your shadows cleaned out. They won't, you'll become the instruments of change, so to speak. So you generally will find you across about 3 of them. That's my experience. And that was what I was taught. So you'll be generally in one where you're more in. There'll be one you'll still be dealing with stuff from the old coming out, and there'll be a new one you're exploring. That's the best way to think of it. So some of you may find right now that you're very much still in you might feel that you're more in your 4th. You're still, moving a bit beyond the 3rd and getting some of your power, and you're starting to explore the achievement and goals. Some of you may be more around the 5. And generally most people in the Western world, or a lot of people, not most, but a lot of people are around that 5, but exploring and tapping into the 6. That's what generally happens, and are still letting go of the 4. And that's why we're seeing what we're happening right now with coronavirus and all that, and an almost black and white religious kind of values trying to be forced upon the earth by the elite. So when you see it that way, you realize that that growth is inevitable. It's just a case of the elite having to let go. Keep in mind that things do change. I can remember when the elite were holding on like crazy to try and stop streaming of music online, and they fought, they took to court, they attacked Napster and anyone who's trying it. Eventually they gave up, and then they just joined in. So you will see a lot of this actually, it will end. That's the thing to realize. So the 6th one is about where a social, you become a lot less about profit. And in fact, the biggest challenge you face, and when I first started to really enter into the 6th one a lot, I found that I was having a struggle with the 5th one. Because that's what happened. You struggle with letting go of the old one as you move into the new one. There was still that part of me that was thinking, what about, do I really want to be doing achievement? Do I want to be doing business stuff anymore? Do I want to do corporate stuff? Because you're starting to see how much social responsibility we have, and you start to get a desire to help. You start to give a desire to give, to serve others, to help the planet, to pray for the planet, to help your fellow man and woman. And then the next stage of a tier 1 is when you start to become the strategic thinker. So you become like this one here now, you become like a thinker, a planner. You're really hitting, some would say tier 2, some would say you're moving into tier 2. So where you actually move, because I personally think this is probably the best place to put it, because you're still technically in the tier 1, you're still about the individual, but now what you're doing is you're thinking big. A tier 1 rung 7 will generally be, like I said, we're stepping into that, and you're starting to explore and tap into that more. What you will basically find is what's happening with you would be something like this. You would be feeling kind of you'd be more in that 6th rung where that's social, you're giving back a lot. There's still a few things you're letting go of around the achievement, but you're in that. And now you're starting to tap into this one here. And as you start transitioning into this 7, where you're tapping into the 8th, which I'll go in shortly, the tier 2, how that would look is something like this. In an ideal world, you're starting to really think big. You're starting to think, how can I take what I'm doing to a bigger audience? How can I influence more people? How can I get this to this level? How can I have more impact? How can I do it in a socially responsible way? How can I build this company where I sell wine, but I do it with eco-friendly packaging and stuff that's not going to hurt the environment? How can I, how much of my profit should I be giving away to help rainforests, to help tie to holy men and women? How much should I be giving for this? Who should I be hiring at this time to look after my affairs and doing this? So that's how you'd be thinking a lot in that level there. So your businesses now is something you've just mastered. It's something you don't think about. You're comfortable with your black and white. There's certain values that are clear to you, but you're okay with other people's values overall. You're starting to get okay with them. You see grey areas. You can question them. You by and large, your achievement, you're pretty good with that stuff now. Your social responsibility, there's still a little bit of letting go of that one, but at the same time, you're thinking, yeah, I've got a responsibility to my community and to my people, but man, I really do want to take this bigger. And then you start tapping in, and come back to shadows in a minute, into a tier 2. And the tier 2 is where you become integrated or whole. It's what I would call transpersonal. this is what it's defined. I had and when I got a message that I was really tapping into this a lot just recently, I then had a reading done up, and the exact word that showed up was about 8th chakra. So now in this one here, you are actually tapping into your higher chakras is what's happening here now. So you're tapping into your transpersonal or whatever else. So the 8th chakra is what's called your transpersonal chakra. So, and then your 9th chakra is what's called your God type of chakra. That's the best way to think of it. That's when you got like your whole, or you're almost like your blueprint or something like that. So the best way to think of this one here is a transpersonal. You're becoming a complete person, and the best way Wilbur explains this, as is Aurobindo and Claire Graves, is you become a complete person and you by and large move beyond fear. So once you're in this tier 2, fear is kind of something that's in the background, but it's not something that drives a lot of your life anymore. You notice occasionally it's around, but it doesn't really do a lot to you. You're very much about the big picture. A classic sign of someone who's absolutely tapping into that 8th chakra, tier 2, is they really want to understand everything that's going on and see everyone's perspective and try and find a way for everything to fit, even if you don't 100% agree. So that's the thing I've noticed I've really been moving into a lot the last probably 3 to 4 months. You just want to see how it all works. That's why I think many misunderstand me on Facebook, for example. I've had people actually write to Paul Seals, I do podcasts for, saying, why would you get Warren Black? He's turned left now and become a socialist. And I just laughed. I said, Paul, I just cracked up. I've had people I know who I can tell, I sense they're thinking, Warren just doesn't take much action, doesn't do much. And what's basically happening is I'm looking at it from everything. I'm trying to understand everything. I'm trying to understand how the Christians, the Hinduism. I'm doing a lot of study of Hinduism, Buddhism, Mormonism right now. I'm trying to understand Bill Gates. I'm trying to understand Joe Biden and his purpose in the whole thing. Why is he here? What's Ian Harris here to do? And this is when you're moving into your 8th chakra, you really just want to understand how it all fits, because you're thinking, if I can get all the pictures working together, I can start to actually make a bigger influence and change a lot more things. So so when you're tapping into 8th chakra, generally your remaining things that you're still holding on to is just some of that. You're still going to have a lot of the I in you. So the whole tier 1, and the reason I put the 7th rung in here is it's still about the I by and large. Although you're definitely thinking about the world, you're still by and large there's a bit of I. So I'd regard, I've still definitely got, I would say right now, I've still got a lot of that which I'm working outside at the moment, and integrating a few things around the 6 as an example. So I'm starting though now to really do everything I can to see how everything fits and how other religions fits, creating a worldwide inclusive vision for all. In other words, so you can kind of see how the world can work together and shadows of everyone can be removed out the way. And you can kind of bring everyone into that way of thinking in the longer term. And then the 9th one, which is what's called the super global, you're now seeing everything in whole. So now you're no longer even just seeing how it all fits in. You're starting to look like 1,000 years beyond your lifetime. You're starting to see everything in wholes. Like you're seeing this current thing as just a stage or cycle of humanity. You're seeing another cycle ahead. You're seeing the past cycles ahead and various cycles really clearly. You're seeing different groups in wholes, peoples in wholes, everything in wholes. You're seeing it way beyond the lifetime, and you just see this right now as a small little fractal in the whole scheme of things. So, and then of course beyond that, like I said, you're now starting to move into what's called that pure God type of territory. So that's a good summary of what these are. I'll just go through, and I will go through this again next week because I know I've said a lot today. I'll just quickly touch on the shadows before I take questions on this for people and get you all to reflect. Some of the shadows that I can mention in tier 1, you'll notice I don't really do much shadow in tiers 2, not because they're not there, but it's much less of an issue. Once you're really fully in tier 2, the shadows are by and large minimal. There's just going to be more stuff to do with limited vision and dealing with some things around that and lifetimes of ancestral work. So someone who may have a lot of shadows or imprints in the one rung, attempted abortions, tried to kill you, parents saying they hated you when you were young, you having an extreme self-hate, people around you your parents beating each other up all the time, beating you as a baby, that can bring some kind of to your first one shadow ones, because you don't feel safe at all. You feel no groundedness. The second one is where you get knocked down every time you start to think creative and miracles. So often people's creativity has been shut down. I mean, it was in a very black and white household where the parents are my way or the highway, and we're not allowed to explore, express, and be free and think for themselves and try and do crazy magic and believe in silly things rather than being shamed. These ones frequently become narcissists. They feel deprived as a child. They miss out on stuff. They don't get given love. They don't get hugged much. They miss out on stuff compared to other kids. Their creativity shuts down. They start either shut down. They end up getting sexually abused, as another classic example of this one here. Someone who's been abused. They start thinking that kind of disappointment. They start, even as they grow in their stuff, they got constant sexual stuff they find, like dark pornographic urges and doing crazy shit sexually. They kind of use sex as an escape, or they just become complete narcissists in what they're doing. They just don't even care about anyone else because all they care about is themselves, and it's because they feel that deprivation, they feel that scarcity in them, so they replace it by going the opposite to try and help their empty, bruised, wounded, deprived, disappointed souls to basically get that attention and love that they're starving for. So you can see when you come from a holistic perspective, you start to see narcissists differently. You start to realize narcissist needs love more than anyone. That's what they're craving for. A narcissist is craving love because that actually means they really haven't been fed. A child who's been well fed with lots of love rarely becomes a narcissist. I remember my mum once telling me, she compared my sister to one of her close friends because my sister had an amazing relationship with my dad. And she said, you notice your sister is very secure. She isn't running around sleeping with guys when she's 18, 19, which she wasn't. She's very picky who she dates. She's she go into very healthy connections with men, my sister, because she said she was well loved by her father. By contrast to a friend who had an abusive father, would date all different toxic guys, lost her virginity by 15, things like that. So that's a standard thing that starts happening when you get shadows in those areas. Power drives. This is one of the worst things you can do as parents is when you shut down your kids' ability to say no and you have their boundaries and their truth. No, you must hug Auntie Mary, or, why won't you let Uncle Jim kiss you? The kid might be feeling something that you're not seeing or just might not want to. The kid might just feel like being a dick just because they want to be a dick. And you go, okay, well, they don't want to kiss you. Sorry, Aunt Mary. That's just life. So kids who get overpowered by parents and parents just bully them around and boss them around and tell them, no, you got no choice. I'm your mum. I'm bigger than you. I'm uglier than you. And you'll do what I tell you. And it's saying that there's a place for that. But that's why, healthy parenting gives a very large, called playground, but with a strict boundary at the end of the playground. That's the way I like to give the metaphor. And that gives security as well, because kids learn that power comes with limitations as well. If you give a kid too much free space, they can actually go get shadows in reverse, where they become complete dictators or tyrants, or they just start dominating people around because they've just been taught they can do it. We knew a kid who literally his parents put no boundaries in at all. They would, if this kid wanted to interrupt adults at the conversation, she'd force all the adults to stop so that the kid would always be heard. When this kid was 18, he was kicked out of the Perth Music Academy because he would walk in there halfway through a lesson with teachers and order the other person out because he wanted to have a lesson with the teacher. And so in the end, they had to kick him out of the academy. And that was because parents just went too far the other extreme. So this is where power drives. And if you haven't had that kind of parenting, you'll have shadows in that area. And hence why you might struggle to say no. My kids don't have a lot of trouble saying no, as you would notice, because we generally gave them a fairly big playground, but they knew if they stepped over the end of the playground, they would not like what happened to them. So black and white, generally this is where you get those who get caught up in the fundamentalist church, parents putting extreme morals on you, I remember my mum walking in when I was 13 and found me masturbating, and she basically shamed me and called me a dirty little boy, which left me with a few shadows. And years later, she apologized profusely to me for that and said it was just out of her fear and her own shame around her sexuality, which helped, but took me a bit of clearing to move through that. So that's just an example of where you can get shadows there. So then, of course, you have shadows in that area, and you find it hard to tolerate other people's viewpoints. No doubt many of these politicians right now have got massive shadows in this area. They've got huge moral, huge external thing. That's why I'm very understanding of a lot of them with the vaccines push. They're just frightened right now. I just see the shadows at work. I see these guys have been hammered all their life, probably had these things forced into them. They're used to it. They don't know any other way. So they're running around doing the same thing that their parents did with them. And when you see it that way, it doesn't mean you don't have to take them a stand, but the judgment goes out of the person, and you start to focus more on attacking the real enemy, which is the belief system that they've got, and going after the mind control spirits and things like that. We even go further sometimes and get led to do healings, like we did an auric clearing on Mark McGowan, William and I, about 3 or 4 days ago, and noticed an amazing difference in him the next day. He was calmer. He apologized profusely to the population for the lockdown. And even Stephen Pettit, who actually doesn't like him much, said to us, he said you could see he was stressing and very worked up and very scared and kind of wishing he hadn't done it and just wanting it to go away now. And you could see that he just ended the lockdown regionally as fast as he could. And he's kind of, you can just tell he just can't wait to get rid of it. And we noticed it after his auric clearing. So once you learn this kind of stuff, you can start doing healings on the leaders and start to fix these guys up. I had a guy who used to bully me so badly, it used to frighten me. I went and did some healing on him and really took spirits out of him in the night one time. I saw him next time and he was a soft man. He changed totally and wanted to work with me and work things out. And I've seen this happen so many times. So when you start to move into a higher consciousness perspective, you can actually start to and see and embrace your ordeals. You see it differently. You can think, okay, how can we work on these leaders? How can we help these people? Yes, we've got to attack the system that they're doing, and we've got to attack the spirits for they're imposing this upon the people, but maybe we can help these guys along. And then if they're still not changing after being healed, right, then we're going to have to maybe get these guys and get them a bit of a fright and get them some kind of action upon them that's going to make them wake up. So the fifth area of shadows, the grey areas, it's when you're trying to question and you're not allowed to question. So you just basically taught things like I was taught, like, grey areas, like anything new age or divination is satanic. Or, the girl who gets taught, don't worry about, getting anything, you just want to get married and have kids, you don't need to have success. Or girls who kind of get taught that kind of stuff, or boys who grow up in an environment where they're not really encouraged to have any worth. So they don't really end up getting skills. People who kind of, today, you can see, become the millennials who just basically sit there waiting for JobKeeper or waiting for someone to give them money, or trading on Robinhood, trying to make a quick fortune. They're not really getting out there and being creative, getting some achievement, some success, for having encouraged in that area, but not getting any incentive or inspiration by doing it. So that's why a great thing you can do to heal shadows at the fifth tier is to question things more, look at things differently, go and do a course of study, learn something different. I love how some of you, like I'm seeing Lexi do her study and learn new stuff. I'm seeing what Grace is doing, the way she's exploring stuff. Miko really mastering the trading of Bitcoin and doing that to get a skill. I mean, all these things help you develop in this fifth area. That's why I'm studying a heap of different religions and different teachings in shamanic school right now. The sixth one, you can become overly altruistic. You start to become seeing achievement as bad. So you become the kind of person that almost judges anyone doing achievement. You just see all money as evil. You see any kind of achievement as pointless, because now you really are altruistic. You're wanting to help the world. And you often hit that shadow. And so if you hit that place, and you'll generally go through that shadow until you grow through it. But if it doesn't change and you just try and become the next one, that will always be there. I think a classic example was someone like Mother Teresa or Gandhi had some real shadows in this tier. I think Gandhi was definitely, without question, in a tier 2 thinking, but I think he had some major shadows in this sixth one. There's no question. But Gandhi, for example, had a broad way of thinking but he found it very hard to think about any kind of achievement. Mother Teresa was the same. So many of the great spiritual leaders have actually got shadows in that area. Even Jesus, who some people try to give as an example, like Teresa, Mother Teresa or Gandhi, they don't realize that Jesus, although he chose not to own assets, lived very prosperously. He wore the best clothes, he lived abundantly. They divided his garments at the cross because he lived so blooming well. You look into Smith Wigglesworth and many of the great prophets lived very well, very prosperously. So when you get shadows in 6, you almost start to become a poverty and seeing poverty as glory. And the 7th one is your shadows you can become a little bit self-centered. You start to achieve so much. You start to think how you're doing really, really well. Although you're thinking about the world, there's still a little bit of that thing about what's in it for me. You're starting to think about ego. It's still there. You're still got self-doubts about challenges from others. You kind of, when people kind of address you and go and kind of question you have challenges in debating it. Even though you're thinking big, you kind of have challenges dealing with people. So that's a good example of all of that. Okay, so I've said a lot today, and we will go through this again, rest assured. But in conclusion, you can see that the road of trials is very critical in having consciousness growth. And I do feel I'll cover this a bit again next week, just because there's a lot I shared, and we can explore this in a little bit more in depth. So going through trials and taking it as an opportunity for cleaning up and also showing up, because my observation of people today is we become fat and lazy through prosperity. And I've mentioned it a few times now, but I'll say it again. And because we become weak, it's critical that to go correctly through the 4 stages, as I mentioned, of spiritual evolution, to become real movers and shakers on the planet, you really do want to go back to this, where you're not just waking up and growing up and learning stuff and coming along, but you're showing up, you're cleaning up as well, and really doing work to address that stuff. You're like, become an open book. You become like, I'm not afraid to deal with my shit. I want you to call me out on my shit. I love it when I work closely with mentors who call me on my shit. And Steve Plummer loved the story when 5 years ago I was with Toby, and I was with him in Vegas, and I didn't work out the gym that stage and all that. And Toby just said to me, dude, you look so feminine. He goes, do you work out at all? And it took me by surprise because, I was getting business. I said, well, not really. He goes, yeah, you can tell. He said, do you get any girls at all? And I was just like speechless. I said, well, some. He goes, yeah, probably not very good ones. You probably get challenging ones. And he was spot on. And I'm just standing there gobsmacked. And he said, yeah, he goes, if you're going to be successful in business, he said, you want to look your best, you want to show up, you want to look good, you want to look hot. He said, you want people to see you look spectacular. He said, get down to the gym, do a workout, push yourself hard and, beef up, man. He goes, seriously, you look feminine. And, Steve loved that. I was just speechless. So I just said, okay, well, thank you. And I actually liked it. I actually loved it. I was like, I like it. He wasn't afraid to just hit me hard, just go straight at me, whereas everyone around me would never say that to me. And I even would say to him, yeah, I might do half an hour workout. He goes, don't be a pansy. He goes, I'll give you your first workout routine. It's called a Spartacus, and it was an atrocious routine where I just was non-stop hard work. But yeah, I got myself moving. So good mentors will just literally smack your ass. So they will give you a jolly good, whack when you get out of place. And not only do they give it to you, but you invite it, you beg them. You say, please, if you see me getting weak, just whack me. That's why I love William. I mean, I whack him and he whacks me. He's not afraid to confront me. Like I'll say to him, yeah, I'm doing pretty well. He'll say, yeah, but he said, I just see you've got a cord coming out of you and you've got some demon looking at me behind your shoulder. And at first I'll say, well, no, I'm fine. He goes, well, that's not what I see. Then I go, okay, shit. I tune in, and these, little bastards usually right. And then I just start to, and then I deal with it. So this is how you grow. You're not afraid to call each other out on your shit. Okay. So who enjoyed that? Who got a lot out of it today? Anyone? Christine, lots of good reminders. Lexi, it was great. So many nuggets. Yeah, I enjoyed it, Lexi. I could, and you know, Christine, I could actually feel Masters, you know, speaking with me today. Sam, it was great. Understood a lot better than when initially introduced to it. Alex, a lot to take in and enjoyed it. Yeah, Miko, yes, that's multitasking, lol. Yeah. So the main thing is really, I will go through this again. Yeah. Lots to absorb, Nolene. It's when you see it, but you'll find if you look at that and start to see your spiritual growth like a consciousness map, you will start to grow. So all I want you to do now is just write out your greatest lesson today and what you feel you're going to work on. So what's the area that we brought up that you feel straight away you've got to work on? And if you feel led to, even share where you feel you're at in terms of what's the area of consciousness you feel you'd like to move into more and master more. So just your greatest lesson for the day. Just, you can write it down in the book or even put it on the chat. Just let us know what you've learned today. And just let me know exactly what you... If you prefer to take the mic, just type in the word mic as well, M-I-C. Lexi, I'm working more on opening my mind, and when I hit a block, realizing I need to shift my perspective. Hey, that's really good, Lexi. Yeah, whenever you hit a block, it's a chance to grow. Yeah, I like that. It's a good lesson, that. Shifting your perspective helps to dissolve the block really quickly. That's good. Anyone else? Lexi, really enjoyed the consciousness mapping. Yeah. When I first did that and read Ken Wilber's book, I would not be exaggerating to say it's probably one of the 3 worst written books I've ever read. And to get all that stuff I shared with you, I just about blew my head into pieces. It was that badly written. It's like he sat there thinking, how can I make this book as hard to read as I possibly can, and broke every rule of copywriting. It was like he read Steve Plum's copywriting manual and said, I'll do the opposite of everything he says. But I got through it. And I really like the 4 aspects of consciousness development. Hadn't seen it like that before. Cleaning up is the area I need to keep working on. Yeah, that's good, Sam. Cleaning up. Christine is letting go of my mind. Yeah, that's part of moving into that next stage of consciousness and moving into that third eye way of thinking. Lexi, copywriting manual sounds amazing. Oh yeah, Steve Plummer's the gun on copywriting, Lexi. So yeah, on how to actually do really good words and all that. Put it this way, I would never take him on in a word debate. You know, in an argument with words, I think I'd meet my match with that guy. Yeah, Sam seconds that he taught me. Steve can't decline Myron. Yeah, I think I get Steve in other ways. I think I'd just go put a big guilt trip on him. That's how I address Steve. Meaning that probably wouldn't work now. Unfortunately, Grace has worked on him. He's becoming more empowered now. He's not a soft cock anymore. And if those who know Steve know the joke. Anyone else? What about you, William? I mean, feel free to take the mic, mate. You've always got great wisdom to share. Grace is in the shower. Lexi the bird is flying. The main thing is to conclude. A couple of things to finish off today. Yeah, like we like to mix it up, and today I really felt to just really explore that a little bit more, because I realized that one of the reasons that we're losing, so to speak, and things are moving so fast is we've lost the ability to grow, and we live reactively by and large. So you can see that the value of planning and thinking ahead and getting foresight and learning to sit on that mountain and be like that woman and see the eagle's view. Because when you're basically walking around on the ground, you just see the part where you're at. But once you sit on the mountain and see around you, you can see everything. You can see things that might seem impossible when you're there. You go, actually, that's not so bad. Sometimes I get myself caught up in the mire of day-to-day life in business and things. But as soon as I get up upon the mountain, I think, actually, yeah, this is very dealable. You know, there's a lot of things we can do. So this is all about learning to step onto that one there. Sheldon put in development of consciousness, I have to work on cleaning up. Yeah, look, cleaning up is probably what I've spent most of my time on, Sheldon. And, you know, over the last number of years, I've just done so much of that. And that's why we do karmic clearing. That's why we do auric clearing. That's why we do J-Seals clearing. That's why I can see coming out of City Awakening, I'd love to see the intercession. I'd love to see eventually, like Grace was talking one stage, eventually there might be a women's group or something to help women connect with each other and actually like a form of, you know, psychotherapy of each other, which in a way is what happens on Fridays. There's all kinds of different tools that you've got for cleaning up and getting into a really good state. I use many tools myself. So really to finish off, if you want to tithe, and look, generally with tithing, just to be clear what we do with the money, so you know, where the awakening within, I know it's got the awakening within.net. We probably should get a City Awakening. But just to be clear, awakening within is basically our courses where we sell courses. It's more of a profit-making spiritual work. City Awakening is not for profit. So it's designed to make a difference. So any tithe that you're giving is like a tithe to the holy people or whatever. We do the same. Like I will tithe to people like Yvonne, Raymond, Grace, various others from time to time. The second thing that we do is we like from time to time to give to humanitarian things. My approach is that really, because we make money from other things that we do, by and large, City Awakening is just used to either pay expenses or do humanitarian, which is very minor, or humanitarian work. And basically, I'm helping other holy men and women who I know basically don't have the level of things that we do. Raymond Grace, for example, runs no business, mused purely on donation. So every now and again, I get led to give him something or get led to give someone else something. So that's just so you know what we do. And we do that to keep the flow of abundance going in our other stuff, to make sure that we're, you know, balancing our rungs of consciousness. So we've got our rung 5 of profit and achievement happening, but we've also got our rung 6, our humanitarian social giving back. So rest assured with City Awakening, if you do that, that's what we're doing. I get excited when I see tithes hitting, because what I do is I just use it. I just use that and basically give it away. And in all honesty, we don't even pay expenses virtually from it now. We because we just cover that from our other stuff. and we pretty much just keep, giving the money away, or very occasionally, we might buy a resource or something that will help the work. So that's just so you know. So I'm upfront with you. So when we do that, so but if you do get led to do it, and some of you do, and some of you give in other ways, which is all good. It's a bit of being voluntary. You can rest assured that what you're giving gets really given away. We were able to give Yvonne a wonderful donation before. I know when Raymond speaks on Wednesday, we're not going to be selling a course from that one, not straight away. We're going to be just basically, taking a bit of a donation offering at that webinar. I'm going to offer people to give back to thank Raymond, and that will, promise them a minimum of 500. I'm hoping I can give them a bit more myself. I really do. So just stuff like that. And when Peter comes to speak for us, which he said now he's ready, the astrologer, yeah, it'll be the same thing. When we make offerings, it'll be making sure he gets something to help him along. So there's many people doing a great work on the planet. I'm very honoured that we're in a position where we can do that and find ways to give back. And even at the moment, I'm looking at the bushfires in WA, and there's an appeal out there, or just ways we can give to the people who've actually lost homes and things like that. And there's just a lot of need right now. So, as you can imagine, on the planet. So it's great that as we prosper, that we can give back to others. So, okay, everyone. Well, we're ending now, and then Max turns up to the party. Unfortunately, Max, all the food's been eaten, and everyone's going home to and all the alcohol's been drunk, and everyone's going home, mate. So, lol. Okay, everyone. Well, thank you very much. I trust you really enjoyed today and had an amazing time. So we're going to be covering next week, as I mentioned, we're going to be continuing on with states of consciousness, and we're also going to be hopefully touching on meeting with the goddess, which will be a really important part of the hero's journey. That's the next step. So that's a fun stage where we start to meet the goddess. So, okay, everyone, we'll see you next time.